Welcome to Actualizing Success. In this podcast series, our in-house advisors discuss today's finance and technology topics with an emphasis on solutions that embrace tomorrow.
Hi, I am Kerry Wekelo, our COO of Actualize Consulting. I am also in charge of our culture and Gratitude Infusion programs. With us today, I have Theresa Santoro, our Director of HR and Operations, and JC McDaniel. JC is a licensed professional counselor with a master's degree in counseling psychology from the University of Arkansas. JC previously served as an infantry officer in the United States Marine Corps for 10 years. He has been in practice since 2012 and in private practice for the last 6 years. He is currently the clinical director for Argenta Counseling and Wellness in Little Rock, Arkansas. On today's podcast, we are going to be discussing mental health in the workplace. We will share our personal struggles with anxiety and fear. We explore solutions and tips we found helpful and strategies and techniques that ensure you are staying grounded and healthy mentally, which ties to one of our culture infusion principles of insisting on personal well-being of our people. Theresa and JC, thank you so much for joining us today. And I just wanted to start kind of with like what's been going on for the last 2 years in the world. There's been so much discord. Many people have felt isolated, emotional traumas, and triggering events that are going on in the world. And with these years of uncertainty and the demands of life at an all-time health, mental health must be a priority. According to a 2022 report from Mental Health America, almost 20% of adults are experiencing a mental illness, and 5% are experiencing a severe mental illness, which is equivalent to nearly 50 million Americans. And seeing those statistics really helped me understand that it was okay that I also struggle with anxiety. So what I found out over the last couple months is that I have high functioning anxiety and I have a fear of not being perfect. And I recently had a series of events that I could not control and experienced 3 panic attacks in 3 days. In the past, I could take a few breaths and ground on my senses, focusing on my breathing. And I even was doing this today. I was feeling a little bit of anxiety and it worked perfectly, just grounding in. What do I see? What do I smell? What do I hear right now? That typically can just ground me, take a few breaths. When I was experiencing those anxiety attacks a couple months ago, I tried to do that. I tried to go for a walk. I tried to focus on gratitude. Nothing was working at all. And to face my fear of not being perfect, I decided to share with our team and network. And I had an overwhelming level of support that I heard others were struggling with mental health in some capacity as well. And that's really what inspired both Theresa and I to want to do this podcast today, to say, you know, we're both very successful at Actualize. I've been at Actualize for 17 years. She's been there for 16 years. And we both are struggling, just like many, many Americans are right now as well. JC, what have you been seeing in your practice?
Well, I'd almost have to argue with those statistics that they're probably on the conservative side.
Okay.
Being someone who's on the ground floor, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. I would say by summer of 2020, our numbers had skyrocketed. We were having to hire more therapists and hire more back office folks just to keep up with the call volume that was coming in. Now, obviously, that was at the almost not necessarily the height of the pandemic, but definitely on the way up. So now that we're a couple of years past all this, within it, I would say that our call volume hasn't decreased at all. In fact, we were receiving over 1,000 calls a day, in the central Arkansas area of about 300,000 people. So when you're getting 1,000 phone calls a day, now some of those are repeat offenders, obviously. Mm-hmm. Those are people that are, they couldn't get through the day before, so they're calling back. But still, you're talking about a significant amount of not just people that are calling to get help, but just the awareness factor that was not there, I would say, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. People just have always assumed to a certain degree that the anxiety that they're experiencing, the stress, even the depressive symptoms were just something that was general in life, that everybody experienced these things. So that and especially down here where we live in the South, there's probably a sociocultural, factor that comes along with, hey, just suck it up, just deal with it, tough it out kind of mentality.
Well, and I think that's what I had for years.
Sure.
I guess and probably the reason why those numbers are low is because people don't want to admit. I mean, I put myself in that bucket too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a reporting factor.
Yeah.
Right. And so that in and of itself is normal, is human nature. And that's why I said, I think those numbers are conservatively low. But as far as what we're seeing, yeah, I think there's definitely more of an acceptance to and a overall general feeling of, hey, it's okay to go get help or to go to a therapist or a counselor. Whereas before, whether it was just a stigma or a stereotype that had generated itself after years and years of, whether it was something born out of a workplace or some other environment or, whatever, started to kind of fade. So it's a good thing. I mean, honestly, it's a good thing. One thing that I can appreciate that you all are doing, which I've done this, I guess, twice in the last month. I've gone to businesses or large corporations and spoken to their employees in person about workplace stress and anxiety and how to balance, your work-life environments. So this is good.
Yeah. No, that's something that we definitely focus on a lot. I mean, at the beginning of the year, we were doing a monthly meditation with an outside provider that was definitely really good. And we were really focused on that. So, JC, I wanted to ask you, what are the signs to look out for that you might actually need to seek professional support?
Well, the first thing I want to clarify is that 100% of the population experiences anxiety every day. Some form of anxiety, some form of stress, whether it's brought on by work or family, or just even if it's just self-induced, you're worried about something, as you were saying earlier, Kerry, about, I just didn't feel like I have control about what was going on. A lot of those things this is normal, right? So when you start talking about how do I identify something that's abnormal? Well, in many cases, you don't identify that until it's after the fact, after you say, like you said, I had those 3 panic attacks in a number of days or whatever it was. Those are abnormal events, right? So you have to either, one, kind of armchair command it and hindsight it and look back and go, oh, wow, my behavior was really not, what I expected it to be, or it was out of bounds for me. Or you have other people telling you, either a spouse or coworkers or friends, that are saying, hey, what's going on with you? So basically what it boils down to is frequency and intensity. How frequent are these abnormal behaviors are occurring, and how intense are they? Say, for instance, you're in a board meeting and you start to feel anxious and your chest starts to tighten and you get a little nervous and you start sweating and that kind of thing. And those are just kind of maybe some normal types of, responses to anxiety. But if you start to, not be able to speak because you're losing your train of thought, you're losing your words. If you feel like your heart rate is just skyrocketing, like it's about ready to jump out of your chest, if you have to leave the room, everybody will characterize a panic attack differently. But what I tell people is that a true panic attack or anxiety attack is when you physically shut down. You can almost curl up in a ball and you are incapable of function.
Right.
To answer your question, it is truly about recognizing behaviors that have become repetitive and consistent, so the frequency has increased and their intensity has gotten to a point to where they're abnormal and they're keeping you from functioning. So if that is happening, so say for instance, if you're having a panic attack literally like once or twice a week for like 2, 3, 4 weeks straight, yeah, it's probably a pretty good indicator you need to go get some help.
So why do you think it's challenging for people to open up? Like, why do people not believe it's okay not to be okay? I mean, personally, I think I didn't want people to think I wasn't perfect, which is absolutely silly because nobody's perfect. But it was really hard for me to be like, raise my hand and say, hey, I'm kind of struggling right now.
I think there's something within our human nature that if you can't see it, it's not real. So if you were on the job and you fell and you broke your leg, or you had a compound fracture, or you passed out and you were, you know, people would be like, "Oh my gosh, something's wrong with her. Like we need to get her to the hospital." Right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you come in and say, "Wow, I'm just, I just don't feel like I can work today. Like I can't function. I can't focus. I can't think straight. I can't, people are going to look at you like, you need to get it together. Go take a time out, and then let's get back to work."
Mm.
And it's
Yeah.
not until that anxiety or that depression manifests itself into a physical form that we go, oh crap, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we've recently seen it. Unfortunately, you see these people who go out and it manifests itself in a very dangerous and violent way. I keep your book and your little squishy blocks in my room, and I remind myself about Gratitude Infusion almost every day, because I have 40 plus therapists that I need them to know that I appreciate them.
No, I'd
And
love to hear that.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome.
and it needs to be driven from the top down. And I'm fortunately in a business where I am very acutely aware of the mental stresses that are placed upon our therapists. But in a lot of corporations, they CEOs, and I'm speaking to the choir here, this is what you guys do, they don't recognize the level of stress and anxiety that these people are going through on a daily basis, and they just they struggle to recognize those cues. And so therefore you end up getting people into a space where they're having to go on FMLA, or they're having to quit their job or whatever, because they just can't handle it anymore. And
Right.
so you're tapping into something right now about helping those people who just aren't trained to recognize it, to start recognizing it, those early warning signs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this was absolutely helpful on the anxiety side.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to shift over to Theresa, and I mean, and she has I'm going to ask her to talk about her story of personal loss, but I think anybody who's listening at some point experienced loss, and I know there's been quite a bit in the last few years as well. But with Theresa, this loss really triggered something in you to reflect on your priorities in life. Theresa, can you share a little bit on this?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Kerry. So recently, a very young member of my family passed unexpectedly, and that's really when I noticed my own personality and anxiety levels shift. And I hadn't really had that recognition before, but I did when this happened. And I have a daughter who is very close in age to the family member that I lost, and I just felt as though I didn't have any control over this shift in my anxiety levels, and I just began experiencing higher levels of stress and feeling anxious, and then that turned into breathlessness and feeling panicked all the time, and even dreadful thoughts and just overwhelming and debilitating fears that were coming to the forefront of my normal daily life. And I, felt like I could help myself and find small practices to really take myself out of that space, like breathing and exercise and things that I had done before, but kind of stepped it up a notch to see if that would help, or alleviate any of those feelings. And it did help me to overcome some of it, but that instance of losing that family member was really, like you said, Carrie, a trigger, and it was just something I couldn't control. And I knew at that point I really needed to talk to somebody or figure out what I could do to help myself as well. Um, the biggest shift or the biggest help that I've seen has really come from me reprioritizing my personal and professional life without, going to every single detail of what that entails. I can tell you I pulled apart just about every piece of both of those, areas of my life. And so I started recalibrating my brain to remember what in those roles should take priority, what's okay to say not today, and what has to be done today. And I coupled that with positive self-talk, and I told myself daily, it's okay to put something other than my work first. It's okay to put myself first, and that was always something that I struggled with as well. And even if I do that, nobody's going to consider me a failure. It's kind of similar to what you were saying earlier, Carrie, that the fear of not feeling perfect or feeling like you're letting someone down. I mean, for me personally, that's something I really struggle with. It was just all exacerbated by this instance in my life.
Yeah, and being working with you for the last 16 years, even when I would tell you it can wait till tomorrow,
I couldn't.
you couldn't,
I
it
couldn't do
wasn't
it.
yeah, it wasn't me pushing you, it was you pushing yourself. So I think this
Yeah.
event really helped just to kind of your own personal prioritization, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm interested, what kind of breathing exercises are kind of helpful for you, just for those listening, in case they're feeling similar stress and anxiety?
Sure. Yeah, I have a favorite. A friend of mine had shared it with me, and just to be completely honest, it's a really quick exercise, so I think that's why it is my favorite. And it can be done anywhere. So it's called the 4-7-8 breath method. And like I said, a friend had shared with me a while ago, so I kind of brought it back to the forefront of my daily practice because I found that it really did help me. And what you do is you close your lips and inhale through your nose for a count of 4, and then hold your breath for a count of 7. And I know that seems tough, but it can be done. And then you exhale completely through your mouth for a count of 8. And that's one full cycle. And then I just found, daily I would do this maybe 2 or 3 times. And it just helped me to feel grounded again and find that relaxation again that I needed to kind of continue with my day and my work.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, even I know I messaged you this morning saying I'm
Yeah.
breathing.
Yeah.
I think we tell each other to breathe a lot. I was
Yeah, it
quickly telling
helps. It
myself I was like,
absolutely helps. And
mhm.
Well,
um
and if you think about the mechanism of action that's happening there with both the breathing and the counting, there's two
mhm.
things that are happening that systemically, we think, oh, well, this is just or I say we, some people think it's something magical going on, but one, you're literally reoxygenating your blood, and that in turn is going to help you think better because your brain's getting more oxygen. In many cases, you start to kind of mini hyperventilate whenever you're having anxiety, and so you're kind of cheating your brain on oxygen. So taking that time to do the breathing exercise is just allowing your brain to catch up. And then the other part too is the counting part isn't, yeah, it's helpful for the breathing, but it also takes you away from whatever it was you were maybe hyper focused on. You're sitting there worried about somebody or something, and now then you're counting, and now then you're thinking about numbers.
It shifts
Right?
the focus away from it.
100%. And and
Mhm.
and it, like you said, Teresa, it only takes whatever that is, less than 20 seconds, to do this, and you see almost immediate results.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so very good.
absolutely.
That's awesome.
Now, I mean, we were talking about it a little bit. And Teresa, from your perspective, how has Actualize really addressed mental health in the workplace? I mean, I know it's something that I'm very passionate about, but I wanted, from your perspective, how do you think, what are we doing right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think to JC's point before as well, I mean, it's a lot easier to address and to bring mental health to the forefront in a workplace when you have the support from the top down. And having a CEO, a COO at our firm who 1000% believes in this and supports it and wants to, have that awareness firm wide. I mean, it just makes it a lot easier to share within our organization. There's so many ways in which I think Actualize addresses mental health, just by bringing that awareness to it, because we don't treat mental health as, quote unquote taboo here. We are completely open to talking about it, sharing ideas with each other, experiences. We share helpful tips firm wide, and we do get really great feedback from all of our employees. We had a mental health May, where we were sharing tips with everyone via email. And I can't tell you the number of times that employees had emailed me back and just said, thanks, this is amazing. It's so great to be part of an organization that talks about this. And it really makes you think there might not be that many companies out there doing this. So it's nice to know that we have that support again from the top down. because I mean, let's face it, mental health is not an easy subject for everyone to broach. But, by Actualize continuing to share, and do monthly exercises, it just lifts that stigma even just a little bit. And I guess that's what we're aiming for, right? So we've done things like promote stress management by providing office hours. We've done yoga during those office hours, meditation. We brought in third party people to help us out. We've done breathing exercises and fitness classes and mindfulness classes. So it's endless here. I mean, and we're always soliciting ideas from our employees about this as well. And we'll pretty much do anything they want to do. And now we're even hosting a podcast around it. So I think
Mhm.
just having that, bringing that awareness to it as an organization, it just opens those doors for everyone to feel included. Like, this, you're not alone, and we can all be a part of this. We've all experienced this at some point or another, and we're here for you, even as your employer.
Yeah, and the one thing that I'll add with, getting the feedback from the team members, I think it gave me a view into maybe some personal struggles that people had. And because I was open, then they were open to share
Yes.
too. And
Yes.
I always say, if somebody's struggling in the workplace, most times it has nothing to do with work. Maybe, yes, maybe they're busy or something like that, but they're probably dealing with something else. And so taking that holistic view, and I mean, I got a lot of really good intel, and, I feel like I can now better support people because I was open. So I'm so thankful that I did that. And, it just kind of took it to another level for sure.
Yeah, definitely did. See, I had no idea that unexpected loss in my own life would trigger my own mental health. So, in your opinion, how can others identify other types of triggers?
I would say, there's an awareness factor, and it usually doesn't happen unless it's either coached or presented to that person, and they're taught to do it. Because we, as human beings, again, we get into the origination of why we do this, and I honestly don't know why we do it, but we tend to either minimize or shrug off or make excuses about things, and in most cases we just kind of we compress it or pack it up and put it behind us, and we don't think about it because it's the number one coping skill, which is avoidance, right? We don't want to
Mhm.
deal with whatever it is that's potentially got us feeling one way or another that isn't within our own realm of acceptance or acceptance of the people around us. So um, what we end up doing in most cases is a generalized statement, but most human beings, will bottle up all these things that happen to us, and we'll manage and cope however we can. And then one day comes along where our brain is just full, right? It doesn't have any more storage capacity for all this stuff, and something happens and it blows the top off of that. And in some cases that event may be something that you've been through before, and it's like, well, this isn't necessarily abnormal. Like I've been to a funeral before, or I've had a loss in my family, or I've had this, yes, I'm sad, but I can't believe I'm feeling this particular way. Like I'm
Mhm.
letting it literally stop my life. And I see this a lot with especially our first responders, our police officers and our EMTs, our firefighters, and of course, veterans and such, that they've spent a lifetime being told they're supposed to accept all these traumatic things in their lives because it's their job. And then, they get to a point in their life where something happens and they just can't function anymore. I mean, I've had, police officers who have lost their jobs because, they're sitting in their patrol car and they get a call and they can't even respond to the call because they just freeze. They freeze.
Wow.
They literally can't even turn the car over to go. What you experienced, Teresa, isn't abnormal. The thing that exceptional and is something to, is there a better word to congratulate yourself about, is that you took time to do that introspection and look at yourself and go, okay, I need to make some changes in my life. I need to
Mhm.
start doing things a little differently. So oftentimes, and this is where we talk about, post-traumatic type of, stress disorders and things, where people don't get help, and then they continue to become triggered by things that they don't even recognize, and then they start responding in negative ways or in, abnormal ways, and it becomes either very unhealthy or even destructive in their lives. Just share something. I didn't recognize that I had PTSD, when I got back from my last combat deployment. Very, very adverse to the idea of that I could even possibly have, PTSD or something wrong with me. But all the signs were there. I was being triggered, and I was being, difficult is not even a good descriptor of what I was like towards my wife and family.
Hmm.
And it nearly cost me my wife and family. That awareness, came almost at a cost that was too great, because I was so stubborn and I was so caught up in my own ego that I almost lost everything, because I was unwilling to accept the fact that I was depressed and I had anxiety and I needed help. And so it literally took those events happening for me to get into counseling and to accept the fact that something else was wrong, that I was wrong, that something was wrong with me. I needed somebody to coach me on how to identify those triggers. So sometimes that's just what it takes. But then you can have somebody who's more like yourself, who recognizes, wow, okay, this isn't good, this isn't healthy. Okay, I need to take a look at my life, and what are some of the things that are happening that are changing my mood, changing my behaviors,
Hmm.
causing me to act differently, and do that investigation and kind of dig in. Okay, where was I? What was I doing? Who was I talking to? You know, did I have a restful night? Did I not get enough sleep? Am I eating okay? You have to do that um, exploratory search in order to really start to identify what those triggers are.
Yeah, I can resonate with all of that. I'm very type A, and so I'm not one to color outside of the lines all of ever. Um,
Right.
and I admit that, but I definitely noticed the changes in my relationships, and probably the two most important relationships to me are my family and my work. And
Mhm.
both were being affected, and both were outside of my control, and I was so outside of those lines, and I just knew something was going on. And then you mentioned sleep, and that's another huge indicator for me. Is
Yeah.
I've never had trouble sleeping,
Yeah.
and since that event, it's been terrible. So
Yeah. So,
I knew I had to start somewhere, and I started within myself. But I know there's other resources out there.
well, if you are, let's just go back to that statistic. If you're one of the, say, 95% of the people that are not dealing with a serious mental health condition, then your mood and your behavior begins with the amount of sleep you're getting and the things you're eating. And you
Sure.
throw exercise in there as well, right? Your physical state definitely impacts your mental health first and foremost. So we always talk about, in my world, that behavior begins in your gut, because those are things you can control. But at the end of the day, it's very much a mindset. And I talk about bulletproofing. One of the things that I do with I do a lot of competitive sports therapy, and across the board, whether it's high school, college, or pro. And I talk about bulletproofing your mind and creating a healthy mindset, and that's definitely a whole nother conversation. But it definitely starts with your desire and what you want in life, and outside of everything that's going on. Just like Theresa was talking about, how this event happened to her and it impacted her, but she made choices that led her to a healthier place. you know she could
Hmm.
have easily made unhealthy choices that led her in a completely different direction.
This whole discussion is such a, it's a good segue into my next question,
Mhm.
identifying those indicators, and starting somewhere, but not everybody knows where that starting point is. So what what help is available when someone feels that instability in their mental well-being, and what recommendations do you have for selecting a therapist if someone chooses that route, which seems to be, a, a well-traveled route? Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, no, absolutely. Everywhere you live, or especially in the United States, there's help is available. It's about, like you asked, well, how do you find it? And one of the easiest things to do if you have access to the internet is just go to Psychology Today, and they have a search engine right there that can pinpoint a whole host of counselors or doctors within your area, and whether or not, if they take insurance, if they're cash only, if specialties are, what they're certified with. Are they just a life coach, or do they actually have a license? Are they, all that good stuff? All that information is there. One of the things that we have tackled up until the pandemic was, in Arkansas, we have a lot of rural little towns, farming communities, and so there's just not a whole lot of in-person opportunity. And for somebody to do that, they're going to have to drive an hour or two to get to the largest, a larger city where there's a counselor that's on site. With the pandemic, telehealth became a huge game changer for the therapeutic community, because now then these people don't have to leave the comfort of their own homes.
Hmm.
All they need, heck, all you need is a smartphone, with a camera.
Hmm.
And so, is it ideal? In my opinion, no, it's not ideal, but it's still effective. I would much rather be in person. In fact, doing this podcast right now, because I can't see you guys, is kind of irritating. So,
No, that's great, because I did want to ask you about people who do go the therapy route. It is a very collaborative process. So I did want to know your thoughts on virtual therapy versus in-person therapy. What have you seen? What is your opinion there?
well, when you're forced to do it, and you don't have any choices, like we were in the pandemic. I mean, I worked from my house for, you know 6-8 months,
Mm,
and doing kind of what we're doing right now. And so, being forced into that position, you make the best of it. Anything's better than nothing. I mean, kind of weird thing. Maybe this is a generational thing. I have found that our younger generations, our teenagers and 20-year-olds, prefer telehealth. They prefer not being in person. And I don't know if that's just because they text everything they do, or
possibly.
you know, or they're just so used to watching videos that it's just kind of like, it's easier for them. Me being almost 50, I grew up in a world where I've done all my work face to face, and so that's just more comfortable for me. So now then, we have that luxury to be able to offer that to any of our clients, and some states have different rules and regulations and laws, and because of the pandemic, there's been a kind of a lightening up on some of those rules that allow us to provide therapy across borders, and as long as we're maintaining state regulations and such. So I may have a client that goes on vacation, they're down in Florida, and they call me up and say, "Hey, can we talk?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, let's have a session," because at the end of the day, if you're in an emergency situation, then you don't need to be talking to me. So,
Right.
but
Well, this
yes.
has been super helpful, Teresa and JC. Thank you so much. And as we wrap up, JC, what would be your top 3 tips for people, our listeners, that can kind of personally help with their
Sure.
mental health?
Well, number one reason for the end of all relationships, it doesn't matter what relationship it is, from marriage to friendships, is the fact that people stop talking to each other. So I would say, don't isolate yourself. Continue to talk to people. Reach out to somebody. If you're hurting that bad, then reach out, even if it's your a parent or a best friend or somebody that you trust. Reach out and let them know how you're feeling. Is the first thing that I would encourage people to do. So, the second thing is, be selfish. Take some time for yourself. Theresa was talking about that earlier. Kerry, I think you did too. You mentioned about just taking some time for yourself and realizing that, what, the world is not going to stop Like the business is going to continue, right?
Yes,
You're important, but you're not that important.
that's
Exactly.
right. That's right.
Right? People, if you wouldn't have your job if those people didn't already know your value. And so I guarantee you, if you're going to take some time for yourself, it's all about them, even your owners or your partners or the people you work with, understanding that, hey, you know what, you're recharging. You're going to come back to us and be a better version of yourself, right? So take some time for yourself, work on balance, spend a few minutes every day, at the end of the day, just reflecting, and in that process, you may actually identify some triggers, some things that are actually changing the way you think and the way you feel and the way you behave. And so now then you gain that insight and awareness, and you can start making some changes in your life. And then I'd say the last thing, but one of the most stereotypical things I see in our social media, whether it's a television show or a meme or whatever it is, you see a therapist and a client, and the therapist will ask that person, well, how does that make you feel? And it's the number one thing they teach you in school, not to ask your client is, how do things make you feel, or how does that person make you feel? Because basically what you did is you just took their power away from them. You just said, well, you don't have a choice anymore. If you're sitting here saying that all these people can make you feel some way, I encourage people all the time to understand that you still have a choice. No matter what the circumstances are, you have a choice to feel the way you want to feel. And you can do things to empower that, to create it, to make it stronger, or you can sit back and let things happen to you. Unfortunately, that happens a lot. And so if you see it happening, especially, ladies, you're in this positions you're in, and the work you're doing, I encourage you to be more mindful about that. Try to be more aware about your peers and your employees and the people you work with and for, and it's not about being nosy, right, and getting into people's business, right? It's not about asking them, what's going on, and it's about, hey, are you okay?
Right.
Love that.
Yeah. And I think that's something, I try to personally do with our team, and that sometimes all it takes is somebody knowing that you care, and it can
100%.
make a big difference in that person's day. So, well, Theresa and JC, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. We could probably talk for more hours, and maybe we will circle back and have some more conversation on this, because I definitely think it's important, and to mold it in with not only our business stuff, but, your personal lives matter too. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kerry and Theresa. I really appreciate you guys having me on. It's been great, and look forward to next time.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Actualizing Success. Make sure to visit us online at www.actualizeconsulting.com, where you can explore our service offerings. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or your preferred platform. If you've enjoyed what we talked about today, please consider leaving a review and following us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or would like to share your opinions with us, please send us a note at podcast@actualizeconsulting.com. We look forward to hearing from you.